Hi, so I thought I'd do a video tonight about avoidant personality disorder, and I'm gonna just be looking at it briefly, what it can feel like when you're with an avoidant, how it differs from, say, narcissism, and give a few thoughts and tips and ideas just from what I've gathered. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but there is a load of information out there from psychologists and other sort of experts. There's loads of videos on YouTube, for example. There's people like Coach Ryan who gives some really good advice in his videos. So there's loads and loads of advice out there. So this is going to be just a sort of quick capsule video, just looking at a few key traits. And I will be looking at how it differs from narcissism as well, because I think initially the two disorders can almost look quite similar in some ways, but they're not, they're very different. So I'll start by talking about how it differs from narcissism. So narcissism is one of the sort of dark triad. There are three dark personality types, and that's narcissism, sociopathy, and psychopathy. And these guys are the people that won't change. These guys are the people who lack, or girls, but they lack emotional empathy. They have cognitive empathy. So they don't have the feelings, but they can mimic. They can mimic what emotion looks like. And the feelings can range from low emotional empathy. So maybe they'll be fond of you as, say, you might be fond of an iPad, to no emotional empathy. And you're talking real sort of psychopathic behaviour at that point, And there are key differences then. These are the dark personality types. These are where you'll find coercive control, general sort of nefarious dark behaviour. Their behaviour is generally not good, nor can it be, not really, But it can look a little bit like avoidant. Now, avoidant personality types are not dark personality types. The differences or the similarities can be the gaslighting, and avoidance can sort of really clam up and be a little bit seemingly selfish. Whereas with a narcissist will be sort of quite self-centered anyway. And if they're doing something nice for you, there's usually a reason. They usually want something in return, sort of thing. And they will gaslight because they want to control you because of that sort of dark, nefarious intent. An avoidant will look to gaslight too, but not for dark reasons. So with an avoidant, they'd look to gaslight because of fear, essentially. So with all of these personalities then, it seems to be that narcissists will also be created in childhood. And so it is too with avoidance. Avoidance will have experienced a lack of emotion from perhaps one or both caregivers, a lack of emotional availability, maybe one or both parents or caregivers just wasn't there and just disappeared on them. So they have learned from childhood that emotions, deep emotions, equal a lack of safety. So narcissists, they have, got their sort of reasons too, sort of thing. They have developed their personality disorder again in childhood, but as I say, it's very different in their reasoning and their rationale for gaslighting you. But an avoidant will do it not out of a nefarious reason. They won't do it. They won't do it with bad intent. They do it to save themselves. From what I gather, deep emotions, feel terrifying to an avoidant yet it's the one thing they really want as well. So they paradoxically crave it and yet push it away at the same time. And it seems that but deeper emotions with an avoidant they'll feel unsafe. So an avoidant will probably get very stressed and a bit overwhelmed. And they're terrible at communication. So instead of just reaching out and saying to you, I feel really stressed at the moment, this is triggering me, this is triggering my feelings of unsafety, of lack of safety, this is making me feel overwhelmed, I'm going to need to take a little bit of time out. So at least you'd know where you are. But an avoidant won't do that. Communication is not their forte when it comes to emotions. They're probably very logical and rational, and they're able to probably do very well in their careers, etc. because of that. Because emotions are this sort of kind of no-go zone for them, they've channeled their energy elsewhere. You're just going to find it very difficult very often with an avoidant. So when you start dating an avoidant and they pull away, they'll suddenly pull away. And you'll be thinking, if you don't really know them well, you don't know about avoidant personalities and you don't know if they're one, you'll be thinking, what did I do? Especially if you're quite anxious, because it seems quite common for an anxious person to be attracted to an avoidant. So the anxious person will go within and they'll be thinking, oh my God, what did I do? What's happened? What's going on? And as their anxiety levels rise, they'll probably reach out to try to chase the avoidant, because the avoidant has just been triggered. They don't even know they've been triggered by their childhood wound. All they know is they feel uncomfortable and unsafe. So they shut down and they pull away. And of course, if you chase them at that stage, that sort of reaffirms this idea to them, this sort of deep-seated unconscious idea that this is unsafe, emotions are unsafe. And look, here they are feeling overwhelmed and engulfed. And here's this person trying to engulf them even more. So it can be a very difficult and perplexing thing because, as I say, sometimes they will just ghost you, they'll disappear, or they'll breadcrumb you. So they come forward and maybe they'll say a few words and you might engage in a bit of conversation and you think it's going well. But at some point, again, something triggers them. It triggers their fears. Maybe they start going into their head a bit and thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. Or maybe it triggers childhood wounds again and they feel engulfed and they feel like they can't handle it. And so they just pull away again. Before you know where you are, you're on a merry-go-round with this avoidant behaviour. And if you don't understand what's going on, it can just be very frustrating and very difficult. And if you're an anxious type and you're internalising it and thinking, wait, I've pushed them away again, it must be something I've done. If I just try and do better next time, then maybe they won't go next time. So the anxious person has got no idea that this is a thing that exists and would continue to exist without their input. They will blame themselves and go within. And so before long, it can become a merry-go-round because the avoidant isn't consciously aware of what's going to trigger them or really that consciously aware of the triggering episode. They just go, okay, I feel uncomfy, pulling away until they feel comfortable again. And that's become such a deep-seated coping mechanism that they're not really that conscious of it unless they start to see a pattern emerge and realise what's going on. And usually they're not going to do that unless they meet someone that they have really strong feelings for. Because what usually happens with an avoidant, as far as I can gather, is that they end up in relationships with equally unattainable, emotionally unattainable people as well. And they may wish that the other person was opening up more emotionally because it's what they want, because we all crave emotion. We all crave connection. But the other person is probably a little bit avoidant as well, emotionally avoidant as well. So they're not going to do that. So it's the one thing that they crave. But if the other person were to start opening up emotionally, chances are they trigger this merry-go-round of disconnection, reconnection, disconnection, and so on and so forth. So it really would take their feelings to be triggered in an enormously huge way for them to start the process of self-examination, of going within, of going, hang on, there seems to be a pattern emerging here. What can I do to change it? And the thing that they'd have to do to change it is the most difficult thing of all, of course, because it's going to be that they have to confront and slay their inner demons, as it were. They're going to have to go to therapy. They're going to have to sit with the difficult emotions that they've spent their whole life pushing away. And that's no small beans, right? That's going to be quite a difficult process for them. But no one else can do that work for them. And if you're in a relationship with an avoidant, it's very, very difficult indeed. You know, there's a lot of relationship advice online from some people who will tell you that in order to make your avoidant feel comfortable, you have to let them go, keep silent, don't reach out. But of course, that can be anathema to a normal, well-functioning, loving human being. You're asking someone to become something that they're not. So I think if you're in a relationship with an avoidant, you can probably broach to them gently that you think they might be avoidant and that they should probably seek help from, say, a really good qualified counsellor or maybe a psychologist. But you can't do the work for them. You can't do it for them, you know. And if you're dating an avoidant or you've fallen in love with an avoidant, you're starting to spot a pattern and it's really starting to affect you emotionally in a negative way. You're going to have to really think about what you want going forward, because it isn't going to change until the avoidant actively seeks change. And at some point in most avoidants' lives, I think there is a potential to change. That's the other thing that differentiates, as I say, the avoidant from a narcissist. A narcissist isn't going to change. You can't regrow empathy. And most narcissists are very unwilling to look at themselves anyway in a very, in that sort of light of self-awareness. Narcissists, I would say there's usually very, very low to no chance of changing. An avoidant can change under some circumstances, but it isn't guaranteed. And as I say, they've got to kind of want to. So if you're waiting for an avoidant and hoping and waiting that they're going to change, well, chances are they're possibly not. So unless you've put it to them, I think you might be an avoidant. Unless they've willingly decided, okay, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to open that door that I haven't wanted to open my entire life and really start doing a bit of therapy, really start going within. Unless they start doing a bit of that, you know, I'd say a bit of, potentially a bit of alternative healing as well. They could look to try Reiki or shamanic healing, for example. Things like that could also help an avoidant perhaps to just gather a little bit of strength to be able to do the difficult things that they find so tricky. And some of it is tricky with an avoidant as well because they genuinely haven't looked. They haven't gone within. So they've probably made themselves fantastically busy as a means of distraction from difficult feelings if it comes to relationships and various other things. So they've habitually not looked within for so long. They've stuffed emotions down, repressed, tried to rationalise. They're in their heads a lot. So they could talk themselves logically, intellectually out of any emotion, rationalise it, put it into a particular category, reduced the strength of the emotion, reduce the beauty of a connection to some, title or other, without actually looking at it, without actually giving it that potential, And so they end up, as I say, probably with other avoidants, people who themselves are not going to challenge their emotions. They're not going to trigger change in this person. And they're going to themselves be unavailable. Now, although avoidants are very comfortable in this place of emotional unavailability and in this space of increasing numbness where feelings are so disconnected, it's their comfort zone. But there's a sort of primary urge in all humans to make a connection with another human, an emotional connection, a real connection. We knew this during COVID. We all felt it when we were talking on our screens to people. We wanted to be with people in a room, in the same room, in real time, in real life, Screens don't do it. They just don't replace that connection. And that's part of the problem with the human condition in this day and age as well, is this abject lack of connection. We've never been so connected online, and yet paradoxically, we've never been so fabulously disconnected from each other in the real world. We think we're connected, but we're not really. We're just on our screens scrolling. That isn't connection. That isn't real, meaningful connection. And we need to get that back as a species, We need to really work on getting that back. But anyway, I digress. So back to avoidance. So it can be very, very painful if you're in a relationship with an avoidant and, if you've just met someone, if you've just started a relationship with them, or if you've been in a relationship with them for some years and you think you recognise these patterns and you go, yeah, that's me. It can be very painful because you're hoping if you just love them enough that they'll change, that if you just give them enough time and space, they'll change. But they don't do anything within that time and space. All they do is have the time for their nervous system to calm down so that they're then able to look at what triggered them before, not in any meaningful psychological way, but to just be able to reconnect with you because they go, oh, I actually miss that person now. And then they reconnect with you, and then you remind them of those feelings that they couldn't look at before, and off they go again, breadcrumbing, making light of things, etc. There are avoidant tests that you can do, that can sort of easily determine if there's a potential avoidant there. If you suspect there is, you could always ask them a difficult question. Throw them some sort of question. Maybe you're in a quandary. There's something you're struggling with in your life. Ask them how they'd handle it, You could think of it a bit like interview questions in a way. How would they handle this situation? That's emotionally a little bit thorny. And just see what they say. And if they say something like, oh, I was joking, or I'd pretend not to have come across this before, or I'd say I was joking, or, if they try and make light of it in some way or skirt around it, or just belittle the whole situation, or do the classic, oh, it was a joke, I didn't mean it, then you know that there's a potential red flag there for someone who isn't easily able to or unwilling to confront emotional situations, difficult emotional situations, which we all have to confront, and hopefully in quite a robust way, not in a way to try and just sort of say, oh, it's a joke, And that's the other thing as well with the breadcrumbing. If you're in an avoidant situation and they've breadcrumbed you, and then maybe later on they go, oh, he's just kidding, it's just joking, etc. And you know that they weren't. But again, It's this pattern of behaviour. If you start spotting a pattern, it can be very frustrating because you'll think you weren't joking, but they can't see it. They don't appreciate there's this pattern that's really obvious. They have no concept. They're just in their comfort zone doing their comfort zone thing, you know? So it's really tricky if you're on the receiving end. It can be heartbreaking in some cases if you've really fallen in love with this person. But what you have to appreciate is you've fallen in love with somebody who is a little bit broken. And whilst there's no fully healed, completely fine human on the planet, hopefully most people, if they're in a good relationship, will be relatively healed. You know, it's a reason it's called avoidant personality disorder, that it actually registers as a disorder, you know. It's gonna have an impact on your life. It's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be something you have to manage. It's gonna require a lot of strength to deal with it, a great deal of psychological insight, a great deal of kindness as well, of course. But the kindness ultimately has to be for you as much as anything as well. And this is why an awful lot of the videos that you'll see some advice about will say to you, just go within. If you're dating an avoidant, if someone's sort of circling round and you find yourselves in these patterns of repeated behaviour, the best thing that you can do is probably withdraw and just focus on yourself. Give yourself that self-love, that self-care, that nourishing. Nourish your dreams, nourish your life, nourish your creativity, nourish your soul, nourish yourself, because they're not going to be able to do it. You know, you have to do these things for yourself. If they're showing up unhealed in this way, chances are they're showing up in quite a selfish way, quite self-centered, preoccupied with self, distancing from you like crazy, maybe when you just needed them, not being able to show up how you would expect someone, how you would want someone to show up emotionally in a relationship. So you'd have to do an awful lot of the heavy lifting, and there's going to come a point where you have to ask the difficult question, you know, is this going to be a healthy, fulfilling relationship for you? Are you just going to be burned out yourself? You have to make sure you don't get to that point, hence all this self-care, self-nourishment, etc. Pull away if you feel you need to have to pull away to take care of yourself and your own needs. But at some point, you're going to have that thorny conversation with them. And some people aren't going to do it. Anxious people might not want to do it if they're very much in love with their avoidant because they're scared of pushing their avoidant away. But it's a little bit like ripping off a plaster. It's one of those things that you kind of have to do. You have to test the water, and you have to test the water by yourself not being avoidant and confronting the difficult thing that is terrifying for you and being prepared to lose them if that's what needs to happen. Yeah, because you need and deserve a fulfilling, loving relationship. And you don't deserve this twilight. It's like living in the twilight zone. You never quite know where you are. You're met with walls of silence. You know, in some ways, it's just kind of unacceptable behaviour. They wouldn't behave like this in a boardroom. They wouldn't behave like this with work colleagues or their boss, because they know that you can't show up like this. It's not acceptable behaviour. It's not going to get you admirers or friends in the workplace, and you're not going to stay in your job very long if you disappear for days on end with no explanation as to where you've gone. You know, this lack of emotional communication is really, really difficult. And so they would need to start working on themselves. If you're going to have this wonderful relationship, And maybe you're trying to strategize yourself. Maybe you're thinking, well, if I just stay with them longer, then they'll have really fallen in love with me, and then maybe it'll work, and maybe this and maybe that, and yada yada yada. No, you have to come to the realization that if you want this fulfilling relationship to happen, they are going to have to start pulling their weight emotionally. They're going to have to start doing a little bit of the work. And you don't necessarily expect them to be fully healed. That could be asking too much. But they do need to start the journey, and they need to be prepared to work on the things that give you great anxiety. You know, some people resort to tactics, as I say, trying to outgame this game by going silent themselves, allowing them their space, or maybe trying to trigger anxiety in the avoidant by saying, oh, well, you have your space, I could use some space too. And then sometimes the avoidant might go, hang on, what? But that isn't healthy. It's not a healthy way to have to strategize and deal with your relationship, to try to come up with psychological tricks to just try and keep your avoidant somewhere in the vicinity of your, of where you're at, psychologically and emotionally. That's not healthy. It's not a healthy approach. Waiting and hoping for change is not healthy either, because as long as you are there and accepting, when they've disappeared for weeks and they come back and you just accept and carry on, you're enabling this behaviour. You're telling the avoidant, you're signalling to the avoidant that they don't have to change a thing, that you're fine with what's going on. So if you're not fine with it, if you are absolutely crying on the inside and you've just had enough, you're going to have to tell them. You're going to have to tell them, don't wait and hope, but talk it out, talk about it. And you're going to have to say to them, that you think that they're avoidant, that you can't carry on like this, that you need communication, that you need consistency, that you need them to do something if they say they're going to do it, that they need to communicate to you what's going on, that they're going to need to try to heal a little bit, that they're going to need to attend therapy sessions. And instead of trying to game and outsuss the therapist as a means of a distancing device, that they're going to have to actually allow themselves to feel and to try what the therapist is suggesting to them, and so on and so forth. And see what they say. You don't have to be really confrontational about it, and it's better if you're not, but you're gonna have to say it and see what they say. And if they're really willing, if they love you as much as they can, depending on how deeply they've allowed themselves to bond to you or bond with you, then they might listen, and then they might go, okay. And depending on what they want to do as well, because maybe they're a bit sick of their behaviour. Maybe they're starting to recognise there's a pattern, but they don't quite know what it is. It could be that they recognise that they've run from relationships before, that they've been with people that perhaps aren't very emotionally available, and maybe they would like that closeness that they are so scared of. But it's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to take a little bit of work. And so see what they say, but having to talk to them in that way, it's a given that that's what you're going to have to do. And then they're going to have to put that work in, they're going to have to put that work in. And it might be that after a year's therapy, that things have improved between you to a sufficient degree that you can cope, that you're okay, that you get on much better, and that you're happier. And maybe that's enough. And it might be enough that the avoidant changes just for you, but they're still avoidant with other friends, with other family. They haven't quite got to the point yet that they can extend this new ability that they have to communicate better, etc., to other people. And maybe that's good enough for you as well. And you can communicate your needs and your boundaries, and we all have to do this in a relationship to some degree, right? It's just good practice. Otherwise you end up in this place where you're unhappy and yet you haven't communicated your needs, and so your partner thinks you're fine, and that's not healthy at all. You have to communicate if you're happy and if you're sad, and you want them to do the same, so you know where you are. Are they happy tonight? Great. How are they feeling? Or are they feeling a bit uncomfy? Maybe they need to communicate that. Maybe they're starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed. Well, that would be great if they could just tell you and say, look, I'm really sorry. I think I have been triggered tonight. I just feel a bit triggered, and my nervous system is, a bit wired. I'm feeling quite anxious. I'm just going to need to take a day or two, I think, and just settle down a bit again, if that's all right. And then I'll contact you on such and such a day, and you'll go, yes, that's fine, no problem. Off they toddle. They contact you when they say they're going to contact you. So that helps build your trust in them, because they're doing what they say they're going to do. It probably helps them because you're giving them that space without a problem, because they've communicated their needs so effectively. And so you're starting to build up a relationship where you're actually talking to each other. So you're going to find trust deepens between the two of you. You're going to find communication is better. You're going to find there's a bit of a depth of connection there that starts to open up, because before, the anxious person might have also closed down a little bit because they don't want to give too much of themselves to a relationship that feels unsafe, to a person that might abandon them, and so on. So it's just starting to take those steps and that responsibility. But the first part of it is knowing what you are, knowing who you are, right? It's with anything. If you've got any kind of personality disorder, any kind of problem, finding out about it is golden, because it starts to give you parameters to work with. What you used to see as little quirks or oddities or just weird coping mechanisms, you're not too sure why you do a thing, well, suddenly here's a potential reason. And it gives you parameters within which to work to understand yourself. Understanding yourself is key, And so I would say to anybody, if they think they're with an avoidant partner, absolutely bring it up in the nicest way. Bring it up. Talk about it, Don't be perhaps too surprised if they don't want to admit it straight off the bat, but it's given them something to think about. It's planted a seed. But equally, if you've been in a situation where you've been on this merry-go-round a while, you're starting to get tired, it's time. You need to have that conversation if you want to save your relationship, because otherwise you, as the partner of the avoidant, you're going to just get to a point. You're going to get to breaking point otherwise, where you just go, you know what, I can't see an end to this. I can't see an improvement, and I can't see an end, and I'm not really that happy, and I just like someone who can show up. I don't want to have to keep doing the emotional heavy lifting for both of us in this partnership, So that's my thoughts. I thought I'd just do a little video on it, because as I say, I've made videos about narcissists. I made a few videos about thinking that you're with an avoidant in a sort of twin flame situation as well. It really is tricky, but it isn't impossible with an avoidant. As I say, you think you've got a narcissist, I would normally say to people to probably walk away if they think they've got a narcissist. But with an avoidant, it's a different kettle of fish. It really depends on the situation. It depends on whether or not they want to change, whether or not they're willing to go there. And it's probably very, very difficult work for them. It might make them feel very raw, very unsafe, very just all at sea, and very discombobulated for a little while when they start doing the work. But it will be rewarding if they get the right therapist, it's going to be life-changing for them, because it's going to enable them to have that sort of closeness that they've craved and yet kept at arm's length all of this time. Because it's very possible as well, as I say, if they're in their heads a lot, very logical, overthink everything, they've got their distancing devices. And one classic sort of distancing device is, if they're very clever, to use that intellectual capacity in a way as to keep other people at arm's length. You know, if they think that other people are their sort of intellectual inferiors, or if they can act like this, it can be a way of keeping people at arm's length. It's a distancing device. It's a classic one. So really, one of the key difficulties for an avoidant is getting out of their head, getting back into their heart, reconnecting emotionally. All of that emotional numbness. Sometimes emotional numbness serves as a necessary thing. For example, if you've suffered great trauma, I believe that the brain will protect itself by creating this sort of pocket of numbness, potentially for some people to exist in for a time. In some cases, maybe for several years, if the trauma was very, very great. But if the trauma was not too horrific, and if you're starting to show signs of healing, then it's probably a desirable thing to want to reconnect with your emotions again, and to just come back to a sort of more full version of yourself. And it's going to feel like a risk, and it's going to feel difficult, but then life is a risk. None of us get out of life alive. And if you're an avoidant and you're in a relationship and it's a safe relationship because you're both nice and emotionally distanced from each other, and you've got that place of safety, you know, it's like a safety net in a way, and it's functional in a way. But at some point you might find yourself asking, well, would I like something more? Am I ready for something more? And it could feel just too big a leap. It might be that some avoidants stay in that situation for the rest of their lives, and they might make it work, and it might be good enough. You know, it might be all they feel they can handle, and so maybe it's good enough for them. But equally, if they feel, well, no, I'm not that happy, not really, I'd like to have that emotional fulfillment, I think I'm ready for the possibly painful journey of going within and reconnecting a little bit emotionally, well then, you know, then it could be time to do that as well. Sometimes things serve for a time. Sometimes a relationship will serve for a time, and it's had its uses, it's had its, you know, it's served us, it's served a need for a while. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to grow with you for the rest of your life. Sometimes we outgrow the people around us. Sometimes they outgrow us. Sometimes we just need something different. You know, although people make commitments to each other, sometimes life just has different ideas. Sometimes there are different things that need awakening. There are different parts of us that we need to explore. It could be that there's a partner who maybe meets your needs creatively, for example, or maybe there's a partner who you just get on really well with, and you just find that you click and you both push each other to grow. You know, so having a relationship that's an emotional safety net, or not an emotional safety net, maybe an intellectual safety net or another kind of safety net. It, as I say, it could serve a purpose and it could be fine for a time. But at some point, if feelings of dissatisfaction are starting to emerge, well, then they're there for a reason. They're possibly telling you that something might need to change. And it could just be that it could be time that you and your partner actually open up to each other and confront and deal with the avoidance in your own selves, to deepen that connection with your partner in a way, you know, it's like unlocking a new level in a computer game, possibly. You know, wouldn't that be good? if that could be a thing. So it could be that that's going to be the next level as well. Life, it's all about change, isn't it? Change and growth. And some of that growth is wanted and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it feels like it's foisted upon us and we're not quite ready. And sometimes it is wanted and it is desired, but we still are scared, hanging back anyway, because it can feel too much. And sometimes we're quite happy hanging out in our places of a lack of change, places of stagnation, precisely because the world can feel too much. It can feel too scary. It can feel like too much risk. But at the end of the day, only you can analyse what's too much risk, what's worth, what's worth chasing, what's worth going for. And whether or not to hang back. And if you're in a relationship with an avoidant, only you can work out, are you happy? Are they starting to do any work? Have they made these incremental changes where now they can actually communicate their emotional difficulties to you to some degree? You don't need the moon on a stick, but it would be nice if they could just tell you that they're going to bugger off for a few days and so on and so forth, And if you're noticing changes and they're making you happy, well, who knows? That could be a potential that's really, really positive. So you don't necessarily need to completely give up on your avoidant partner. They just have to demonstrate a willingness to do some of the work and to start getting that ball rolling. And then who knows, So yeah, I hope that's been helpful to someone. And as I say, if you think, I think my partner's avoidant, there are videos, there are many videos out there on avoidance. As I say, there are some that try to game the avoidant. I don't like those videos because they don't feel authentic and they don't feel real. And for most people who are real and authentic, you want that connection. You're not going to settle for a connection where you have to try and game the avoidant in order to get the avoidant to come back to you, etc. Because there's a lot of videos going how to win back an avoidant partner and things like this. But I wouldn't look at any of those. I really wouldn't. For that same reason. Either it's going to be authentic or it ain't. Having to game somebody, it's not going to fly. And also, I wouldn't want someone to come back in a heightened emotional state. Because in some of these cases, it might be that, say, the anxious partner induces a sense of fear of loss in the avoidant to the extent that the avoidant can override the fear and actually come back to you and stuff away any of the overthinking and come back to you. And isn't that great? But if they do that in some sort of heightened emotional state, I wouldn't trust that either. Because if they've been repressing things for so long and then they come back and they're a bit emotional and it's all a bit of a lot for them to deal with, is that necessarily real, or is that a bit of a distorted lens through which they're seeing things as well? You want things to be as real and authentic and as grounded as possible if they're going to stand a chance in the day-to-day, because you could have a wonderfully emotional reunion, but when the dust settles and the glitz wears off and their fears start to resurface, are they going to be able to manage those fears successfully? Have they put in a bit of groundwork in order to do that? That's all you need to know at the end of the day. If they have, great. They can talk to you about it. They can say, oh, you know what, this is triggering. I'm starting to feel engulfed. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing myself. I'm starting to feel like it's all a bit much. But if they're talking about it, that's half the battle. It's when they don't talk and they go silent and they withdraw and all the rest of it. So all you can do is assess the situation, put out the feelers, ask them if they think they're an avoidant, and see where it goes. But you have to start trying to do something, because some people, in some of these videos out there, some of the people wait and they wait. And sometimes they wait for years. And no one's getting any younger here. So I wouldn't advise that anybody wait for years. I think nip it in the bud. Ask them if they're avoidant. If they're avoidant, Are they willing to do any work on it? If yes, great, you stand a chance. Depending on their willingness, their commitment to face those difficult parts of themselves, and it must be really, really hard, and you can have great empathy for the young kid that felt so unsafe with emotions that they've just habitually stuffed them away ever since. But this is the adult you're dealing with now, and they have to try to come to terms a little bit with what they've done as a coping mechanism and what served them well as a kid, no doubt. It was a coping mechanism, but they've taken it into adulthood, in every area of adulthood. And so here you are. So you mustn't wait. If they're not putting in the work, if things have fallen apart, if they keep pulling away, if you're miserable, you can't wait. You can let them go with love, with great love, and just wish for the best for them. And then make your own life the best that it can be for you. You can't let another person drag you down, and you can't really lift them up either. You want to do the work for them, but you can't do it. They have to do it themselves. You can stand with them, shoulder to shoulder, while they're doing that work, and help them, encourage them, but they are doing the work. And if they're not willing to do it, well then, are they adding something to your relationship? Are they enriching your life? Or are they just dragging you down, So these are difficult questions. It's not easy. But ultimately, you have to make sure that you are putting that energy and love and care into yourself, that your self-worth. It's so important if you're with an avoidant, because they're so in their heads. This selfishness that they show is because, again, I would say primarily through fear, through their shutting down, their sense of being engulfed, their overwhelm, means that they withdraw and they go into themselves. So they cannot be there for you in the way that you need. So you must be there for you. In a way, it's one of the most cruel lessons perhaps, but maybe it's also one of the best lessons for learning to nourish yourself and for having excellent boundaries, because you learn the hard way. So yeah, there is hope, cautiously, but there is hope. So I just wish you all the best. Anybody who's watching this, I just wish you all the best. Whoever you are, if you're the avoidant, if you're the person on the receiving end, the anxious person, or, or maybe not so anxious with an avoidant. Maybe you're a secure attachment type and you're with an avoidant. But I wish you all the best, because it's a difficult journey. It is a difficult journey. And it's heartbreaking, isn't it, that these personality disorders can form and that they can distort reality to such an extent, that we find ourselves having all these coping mechanisms. And it can feel very, very difficult in some cases as well. All of us are facing some struggles. We all of us have some sort of coping mechanisms for some difficulties in our lives to some degree as well. So chances are, while we're doing this work, maybe there's work that you need to be doing on yourself as well. It isn't all them, although they need to do that work. But what do you need to do equally on yourself? What areas of life are you hiding from? What fears do you have? You could start looking at those as well. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now. There is hope. It can be difficult, as I say. But, providing you're both prepared to put in a little bit of work and to understand each other and have that leeway. Because, as I say, if they're communicating their need for space, then you can learn to respect that need for space a lot more, because now you understand it. So it's a two-way street. They're not going to instantly heal overnight. They're still going to need their space. They're still going to need to pull back. They're still going to need to a bit of help to regulate their dysfunctional nervous systems, I guess, or dysregulated nervous systems. So you're going to need to work with that as well, with a great deal of love. So it's going to require a fair bit of understanding on your part too. So yeah, hope you're well. Hope you're doing okay. If you're going through this, just sending you a great big hug. It is tricky, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, take care and God bless.